Hello and welcome to Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I'm excited to be here today with Sharath Jeevan, who is the author of Intrinsic, a manifesto to reignite our inner drive. Sharath, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Will. Great to be here.
So let's start with some misconceptions. What are some common misconceptions that you encounter in the world of business about motivation?
Yeah, great question, Will. And I think there's a really fundamental one. And that is that I think we often think that what really motivates us is the opposite of what demotivates us. Let me repeat that. So I think we often think that what deeply motivates us is the opposite of what demotivates us. And we find actually that 30 years of research shows that's just not the case. So there's a really important concept in motivation theory and thinking called hygiene factors. These are things that, so in the world of work, they may include things like our pay, how good the coffee is in our office, for example, how gleaming the office building is. That's when the days we were working from office mostly. These were kind of classic hygiene factors. They're really important. So, it's important for us to be able to be paid well, to put bread on the table and feed our families, and also very important to be paid fairly relative to other jobs like the one we're doing. But beyond a point, pay stops being a deep motivator. The same thing happens for working conditions, many of these other examples. And so I think where we get in trouble, Will, is that we keep ratcheting up these hygiene factors more and more. And we kind of see that in some of the tech companies where you've got these incredibly fancy campuses and so on. Again, these are nice things, and no one would argue that against that. But they're not the sources of deep motivation. What we know that to really get deep motivation, we've got to go internal or intrinsic, if you like, and think about motivation as something that comes from within. And that's why these ideas of purpose, autonomy, and mastery are really important concepts. But let me take a pause there and just check that sort of makes sense.
No, that's helpful. So, yeah, sort of a very kind of limited or incorrect understanding might think, oh, if I just pay my sales force, give them an incentive to do this particular behavior, then they will be these utilitarian, rational beings, and they'll like optimize their behavior to maximize their own income and just start doing exactly the things that I'm paying them to do. But that's not really the way things work in practice.
Exactly, well, and that's one of the things I really talk a lot about in Intrinsic is this idea that we're not these rational, economic robots that just to respond to every incentive or every carrot and stick. And I think there's good reasons why that we don't do that. We're much more complex beings. And if you look at, our understanding of positive psychology over the last 20 years, everything from resilience to grit to growth mindset, all of these aspects, we're much richer beings than that. And so we're much more complex people. And so it's going to take a lot more effort and thinking. It doesn't take a lot of money, actually. That's the nice thing. But it takes a lot more effort and leadership to create environments in organizations, or if we're working ourselves as independent professionals, to create that intrinsic motivation.
Great. So you mentioned three areas, mastery, autonomy, and
I prefer, Will, to start with this acronym of PAM. So, if you think of, if you've got an Aunt Pam or anyone like that, starting with purpose first, because the reason why I think it's important to start with purpose is that we need to know what are we motivating ourselves for. And I think a lot of the times what's happened is we've sort of tried to think of motivation as, okay, we're going to go after the same goal. Let's just do it a bit differently. But I think there are often deeper questions of what are we actually trying to achieve in the first place. So if you take the world of, say, independent professional, their purpose often, or our purpose, I would count myself in a way in that very much in that tribe. It's not just to make the highest level of income. That's an important motivator for sure. But I think for many of us, we want to really make a profound difference to the clients we serve. And I define purpose in almost any field as that sense of us really being able to see how our work helps and serves others. And I would argue that all work pretty much is purposeful, right? It's all about serving others ultimately. But because we've been able to, in large organizations, put so many kind of silos and divisions and business units and all that corporate mumbo jumbo in, we've ended up distracting from our core purpose. One of the things that's I think really exciting as an independent professional is that we can directly serve clients and ultimately see the fruits of our work and the impact of our work into real change for them, and really seeing our clients being nurtured and progressed in a very different way. So for me, it's always very important to start with that concept of purpose and think, how can we try to create our professional lives in a way that tries to maximize that principle first?
Exactly. So I've certainly felt that myself, even going from a large consulting firm to my own independent practice. When you are, personally signing up to a client to get the work done, it feels very different than if you were just got that project opportunity from one of the professional development staffing people. That like the project kind of just rained from the sky. It was one of the list of things you could do, where if you've personally committed to that, there's a very different relationship to the work, where you know that there's actually someone who really cares and is paying to get it done and really needs it for their business. So you feel you're really helping someone out.
No, it's really profound what you said there. So I fully agree. And the idea of this is that this idea really of us, if we're an independent professional, are we nurturing our client? And what I talk about in the book a lot is that we've kind of entered in this world where we have a lot of what I call talent managers, people who are happy to almost judge and say, is that person at the right level? The classic sort of management sort of practices. What we don't have in the world is a lot of nurturers who really are focused on helping people get to places they wouldn't have got to otherwise. And I think as an independent professional, we're nurturing our clients, we're helping them be successful. We're seeing our success through their success. And in a way, I think we're quite humble. We're often a bit like the kind of ant on the elephant, right? It's really about the elephant's success. We're that tiny ant that sort of, bites in the right place, but strategically and helps nudge a client in the right direction. But I think we help our clients be the best versions of themselves they can be. And I think I don't know if it would be for your true for yourself. When I look back at my best projects with Intrinsic Labs, I work with the Economist Group or the London School of Economics, very varied clients. I think I felt the most sense of purpose and impact when I felt the clients I was coaching and working with, they really took a different direction, and they were able to find the courage and the conviction to follow a direction they wanted to go in, and they knew how to do so, and they felt incredibly motivated to do so as well. So as you said, that really deep personal relationship with our clients, that's what often I think is the core of our motivation as independent professionals. And there's even studies showing that when we send invoices, actually they're more motivating than salaries, because there's a sense of you've done a piece of work, someone has proactively had to go and pay you. That sense of that sort of feedback loop coming back is a very powerful one for us to draw on further.
Yeah, I've often felt that getting paid, and while some people probably rightly criticize time and materials type billing, I found that, let's say that you are on a daily rate, it feels very different than just getting paid an annual salary, right? Which is kind of so big and abstract. It's kind of a hard number to actually get your head around what that means. But if you're getting paid like $1,000 or $2,000 a day, then it's really meaningful, because you can imagine oh, okay, $1,000. That's like today I earned enough to go out and buy a big screen TV or something, right? Or, pay, X% of my rent. I mean, it's a meaningful number, a more human scale. It's like each day you feel also, wow, today I need to figure out a way to deliver that much value to my client. It's not just, over the course of a year, I'm doing theoretically something that's helpful, but every day you need to earn it and deliver.
Yeah, I really like that, because I think you're right, because it is that kind of, it's much more incremental, right, in a way, and much more bite size. So I think, and I think we're all thinking, okay, have we really helped and served our clients well enough to earn that money? That's why I think when the invoice comes in, there's that psychological boost, because we feel, yeah, someone has actually valued my work. Whereas if it's in a some big corporation where it's on a payroll, that happens anyway, right? Whether we, that sort of idea, at least in the short term, is there. So I think you're right. That idea of how do we link that desire for purpose with the way that we almost, it's very mundane in a way, that how we invoice clients. These things are really linked together. And I think we do really well when we try to bring these systems together with how we see our purpose in work.
Now, as you've thought about these three aspects, and let's talk about purpose, have you thought about, come across maybe some good taxonomy or maybe different types of people are motivated by different types of purpose? An example, one person might be motivated to seek to understand the world. Other people might be motivated to kind of share what they've learned with others, or to, build physical environments in which people thrive, might get people, or just to express some inner, inner observations. Someone who's has a kind of real creative drive. Have you thought, about, is there like a taxonomy or a thought about? There's not just one, but several different types of purposes. I don't know if there's a good Mises sort of Mises kind of framework to think about purpose.
Yeah, it's a really, really great question, Will. So what I found with the people who are most motivated, I've done dozens of interviews for the book, for Intrinsic, also for my work with real clients, of course, as well. What I've noticed is a common pattern. The people who are most motivated and passionate about what they do, they tend to fall in love with what I'd call a wicked problem. And so it's really interesting. Like I sort of do sympathize a lot with what Scott Galloway and others say about this kind of idea of following your passion can very quickly become indulgent, right? We may not be, it starts from you, right? The follow your passion stuff. What I find what is more powerful is think about really follow your problem, or follow the problem you're passionate about, if that makes sense. So, follow the problem you're passionate about. That what that does is you get so lost in a problem that over time it's such an enormous problem. There's no easy technical solution, which is what much of one work focuses on now. If we find that problem, what we can do is think about how our contribution to that problem, how we help and serve others, and that sense of purpose we talked about, how that can evolve over time. So let me give you a practical example. I got lost in this whole question of motivation. It became one that really fascinated me. I spent 10 years running a nonprofit organization, working in places like India and Africa, motivating, reigniting the motivation of about 200,000 teachers in those regions. So I approached it from that lens, right? I was a founder, I was an entrepreneur. That was one kind of incarnation. Now what I'm doing, I'm still fixated by the same problem, but I'm trying to come in more as an advisory level and a thought leadership level, helping other people to think about this issue much more broadly, writing, coaching, consulting, rather than managing a large organization. But it's still that problem that I'm really obsessed about, and I wanted to try and make a meaningful contribution to that over my career. So I think what I'd say is our sort of how we express our purpose can vary and change and evolve over time. But I think finding a problem that will keep us busy for a while, and we might move to another problem, 5 or 10 years later, but it gives us that really strong North Star, that sense of a personal mission statement to keep us motivated.
Now, when we chatted before, you mentioned that you're obviously aware of and kind of built on the book by Daniel Pink, Drive, which covers some of this ground. Talk to me a little bit about your book's relation to Drive, and sort of in what ways you are building on that, and how your book expands on that thinking.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm a huge fan of Dan Pink's work, and reference it in my book as well, of course. Well, and of course, Dan built on about 30 years of research from some really well-regarded psychologists and scientists. Richard Ryan is one of them, who was the father of modern motivation thinking. I think what's very different about how Intrinsic tries to build on Drive is that I think when Drive is written about, 12 or so years ago, there was a sense, I think, that capitalism and sort of our system was going in roughly the right direction. And we needed just a different way of motivating people towards the same core purpose, if you like. I think we're obviously in a world now where we've seen huge issues from Capitol Hill being swarmed last year to the existential threat of climate change. We know the world and the pandemic, of course, on top of that, the world that we've been living so far is not sustainable. We need to change our mental models. And so what Intrinsic tries to do is take a radical view on purpose and say, what does it really mean to find motivation at work? What does it really mean to find purpose in our careers, to have good relationships, to be good parents, to be strong and active citizens? Let's look at that purpose question really strongly, and really attack it from a number of different lenses. So I looked at a whole range of behavioral science, economics, philosophy, and neuroscience, the whole gamut of that. There's been a lot of new research. It's also come out. There's also been able to be harnessed, but it's also a very global book. It talks about people's stories in these areas, as parents, as workers, as citizens all over the world. And finally, I think the other piece that's very important is that I think Drive is a fantastic summary of the research and what it tells us about these concepts. What I found very difficult when I was leading STIR, the nonprofit I mentioned, how do you put this stuff into practice? What are the trade-offs you've got to make? How do you think about sequencing to a life that's more built on these principles of motivation? There was almost nothing out there to guide me. And so what Intrinsic is trying to do is trying to provide that really practical manifesto to apply these concepts in the key areas of our lives today.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We started going through PAM, talked about purpose. Let's get to the A and the M.
Yeah, so if I had to use a car analogy, well, I think about purpose being that sort of that destination we put into the GPS, right? That's that sense of a North Star, that sense of, again, how that what we do helps and serves others in whatever we do. Autonomy, again, imagine you're in the car, it's that real sense of us being at the wheel. There's no backseat driver telling us how to drive. We're fully at the wheel and in control of the journey and the way we want to go. And I think the key thing with autonomy is that it's not the same as anarchy or chaos. You can still have structure. You can still have some, this concept of guided autonomy. So for example, you can still be a highly autonomous individual, a professional consultant, for example, but also respect an organizational value around diversity for a client you're working with. But it's that sense of you being able to be in control of your career and your life that's so important for us, especially in today's age, right? We want to have that sense of ownership and that sense of control, really, over what we're doing. So that's a very powerful piece. And the third pillar is around mastery. And again, if you think about the car analogy, it's about us becoming a better and better driver as we go on the journey. No matter what we're kind of navigating against pedestrians or cyclists or whatever, how do you become a better and more patient driver and become the best version of yourself you can be in that domain of life, whether it's in your work or as a parent, for example.
Fantastic. Let's talk through some of the parts of the book. Tell me a little bit about the parenting chapter, actually. So you go into intrinsic parenting, how to create motivation among your kids. What are some tips you have there for parents?
So I think one of the things that's really interesting is that link between, first of all, I think today we're often very confused as parents. And I say this, I'm the father of 2 young boys. I face many of the same struggles, right? And one of the challenges, I think, is that we've kind of adopted this kind of practice of helicopter parenting. It's all over the world now, many countries, in the US, I think, especially as well. But where really, I think we hover in at any side of trouble. We're very there to try and almost take away obstacles from our children. And if you think about the USC college admission scandal from a couple of years ago, that's even one more extreme than helicopter parenting. It's kind of snowplow parenting, where we're trying to literally take away everything off the field so our kids have a very straight and easy path in life. The problem with that approach, though, is that there's a lot of evidence now that's leading to anxiety, depression, even suicide among our young kids, and our kids. And part of what I looked at in the book is how can we try and move away from that model and adopt a more progressive and a more intrinsic approach to parenting. And at the core, I think it's about rethinking the purpose of parenting. I think what's happened is we've thought about now a good childhood and a good adolescence or teenage period as being, does my kid get into a top college? Do they get good grades? And almost everything else is kind of negotiable, I say, in some ways. I think what I was talking about in the book is how do we try and reorientate towards a view which says, look, the world out there is a really choppy world. It's more like a zigzag than a straight line, as these last 18 months have shown. How can we try and think about, our role as parents as motivating our children to be able to conquer that zigzag of life, be comfortable with that, know how to adapt, be kind and caring through it. And maybe the things that we thought were really important may not be that important. What's much more important is they can master that zigzag. And how do we role model that as parents and how we show up to our children? And that does mean some changes in our parenting behavior.
Like what sorts of changes do you recommend?
So I've just had a very close friend who's just lost his job in a large corporate, right? And I was talking to him and we're just having a chat and I was seeing if I could be helpful. He hasn't told his son that he's lost his job. It's been about 2 weeks now.
Oh man.
And I can see why, right? Because I think he was worried about he's going to, basically stress his kid, cause worry, anxiety. The challenge is that if we sort of pretend as if our lives, right, we're the adults, are perfect, are these kind of perfect straight lines, I think what it makes it very difficult for our kids to do is when they realize that life isn't like that, or they experience life to be the zigzag, they think they're failures. And, this kind of fear of failure is what I hear again and again in talks with so many young people these days. And I think so it's really important that we as adults are vulnerable and show our vulnerability, that show that we are also, very susceptible to the same things that our kids are going through. So I think often we've thought about parenting as what we say to our kids. I think a lot about parenting is how we behave in front of them and how we role model some of these key aspects. So they know the kind of world they're entering into and under no illusions and almost embrace that uncertainty as a plus point.
Yeah, I mean, that's a powerful lesson of resilience for your kids to show that, career interruptions happen and, that you can deal with them and that you don't have to be embarrassed about it. You need to ask people for help and so forth.
Yeah, and so for example, when I was writing the book, I had many times where I had some, pretty tough feedback from my publisher. I had a great editor, Will, as well. She was very demanding of the book, and it was fantastic. But there were certain times I had never written a book with this kind of level of ambition and the amount of range it tried to touch on. And I would tell my sons, look, it's going to be a very tough couple of months. I'm a bit worried about this aspect. I've applied for things I didn't get. It might have been a fellowship, etc. So I try to be very honest with them about those setbacks, because that's the real world we live in. And I think a lot of success today is about being able to bounce back and still love doing what we're doing despite those setbacks, not doing the thing because of the reward, but doing it because we love the intrinsic value of the activity itself. And I think the challenge with so much of our parenting today is that we say one thing and we do another. And I think we've got to reconcile that, what comes out of our mouth with how we behave if we want to really provide that right encouragement to our kids.
Yeah. Talk to me about intrinsic relationships. What are some of your thoughts on that?
So what's happened, I think, is that we're more and more kind of retreating in. Robert Putnam, of course, wrote about America a couple of decades ago about this idea of kind of bowling alone, right? That, you go to a bowling alley now and you see lots of people on by themselves bowling.
That would be like, I've read the book, by the way, but just think about it. That would be like the saddest thing in the world, to go bowling. Actually, like, oh, I'm just actually bowling alone. Think about how boring and sad that is.
Yeah, it is, but it's an epidemic, and I think we see it everywhere in the world, not just the US now, of course. Well, so that's just one example. But what's happened, I think, is we've retreated into our family units a lot, and obviously the pandemic has perhaps even increased that pressure. What we're finding is that as a result, we're now looking for if we're in a romantic relationship, if we have kids or not have kids, we want our, girlfriend or wife or boyfriend, husband, whatever it might be, to be kind of almost all things to us, right? We want them to be the the life coach, the confidant, the soulmate, the the chef, and it'd be great in lots of other ways as well, which I won't go into. But all of these, so I think we have these crazily high expectations of who we want to partner with. As a result, I think what's happened is that it's very hard to find that person, and especially now if you look at online dating, that's how many of us now in the world are meeting our partners. You've got that kind of paradox of choice where that perfect person might be out there somewhere. Might be out there somewhere, but it's hard. We've always got that nagging feeling of, even if you meet a nice person, is there someone better out there? I think what would be much healthier from a motivation point of view is to think of our relationships as a place of safety. How does our sort of our romantic partner create that sense of safety in our lives where we feel able to master that world of unknown unknowns and know that they'll be with us whatever happens, and to know that love, if you like, is unconditional. It's intrinsic in the sense it's not based on our job or our career. To give you an example, when I met my wife about 17 years ago now, I was in a very high-flying consulting job, top consulting firm in the world, very well paid, went on first-class flights and all that kind of stuff. I then went and spent 15 years working in the nonprofit sector in a very different kind of lifestyle, and now I'm an independent professional writer and so on as well. I've had a lot of different identity changes myself, and what's been important is to have my wife's support that love is there irrespective of what I decide to do. I think a lot of people out there today, if they were really honest with themselves, would say, I'm not sure whether my partner would approve of that change or whether they would support me of that change. And it's very scary because we have to change in the world. And if you don't have that source of emotional safety, it's a very tough world to navigate.
So true. What are some of the exercises that you would suggest across any of these areas, whether in work or parenting or relationships, for someone that wants to, maybe isn't feeling motivated right now at work, or or in some other aspect of their lives? Do you have some kind of suggested exercises for people to maybe reflect on sources of motivation and deepen their intrinsic motivation?
So let's take the work one as an example, because I do think actually a lot of work is a good place to start, because it is one of the main places now in our lives where we help and serve others. And I think if we get our work motivation right, and I talk about this a lot in the book, it has a really important spillover into our other parts of life. So I think a lot of you see a lot of little league, parents now who are living their dreams to their kids, honestly, right? And that's because they themselves haven't found that motivation in their own work. So I do think it's an important place to start. And there I would say, start with this idea of a personal mission statement. So let me give you mine, well, just to make it a real example. I help organizations and individuals reignite inner drive and solve deep motivation challenges by writing, consulting, and coaching. So let me repeat that. I help organizations and individuals reignite inner drive and solve deep motivational challenges by writing, consulting, and coaching. And so in one sentence, if we can express who we are, what we're trying to do in the world, at least in our work selves, that's a very powerful North Star. I mean, we do this for companies, but the irony is that if you're an independent professional, you may not have thought about a mission statement for yourself. I think writing that down took me quite a while to do it, actually. But once you write that down, you kind of know, okay, well, if this client wants to work with me or that one wants to work with me, is that congruent where I want to go, what I'm trying to do here? If I'm trying to build this skill set or this project, I know it's building towards that long-term idea of a personal mission statement. So I think that can be a very powerful way to just think about what really is important to you and what difference you want to make in the world. And from there, I think it can really help guide you in terms of what direction to take, what skills to build on, etc. I think what happens if we don't have that, what we tend to use money or revenue as the North Star. And then it becomes about just how to get more sales in and all that stuff, and become sell, sell, sell. And that's usually deeply but demotivating in the end.
How do you suggest people go about creating a personal mission statement? That's yours is quite crisp and and sharp. And I think a nice thing about it is it helps tell you when something would fall outside that. So it helps you know what to say no to in advance. But maybe from either the process of creating your own or just in general, what are some tips on how to go about that process?
Yeah, so I think what I think is especially important for the independent consulting community is that it's very easy to become, sorry for my language, but almost like a bit of a body shop, right? That where the client says, do this, you can do this, you can do a bit of that. The problem with that is that you end up, and I've seen this happen with many of my friends who left, the big corporate world in their 40s, they became independent consultants. What happens is you can end up kind of drifting, right? Because you kind of go from one client piece to another, and you're just kind of almost in reactive mode, right? Whatever the client says, you sort of can do it. And most of many of us are very talented, so we can adapt ourselves and do it. What was really transformational for me was this concept of, yes, I'm an advisor as well. I coach, I consult, but I have my own mission statement as well. I have my own kind of organization. It's called Intrinsic Labs. It's got its own mission and purpose also. And I'll only work with clients where there's a congruence, where basically what they need is in line with where I can actually help them. Mm-hmm. And what that means is you're building a knowledge base, you're building an expertise, you're building a deep passion, fascination with whatever. And that can be, management accounts, it can be anything. But whatever that is, I think it really helps hone you and also feel like you're building something that's deeply valuable to the world in terms of its social value.
And this is, this is such a common theme on the show. David A. Fields, who's been on the show a bunch of times, talks about, the very first chapter of his book, The Irresistible Consultant's Guide to Winning Clients, is about determining what is your impact or coming up with your fishing line. So it's a different way of expressing it, but it's a very similar idea of, don't just be the sort of, oh, anybody could do this and I'm anybody, or any alum of McKinsey, Bain, BCG, et cetera, could do this and I'm an alum, so I'll do it. And you end up just going from project to project and not really having any, specific focus, right? That's not a recipe for long-term really building a practice. So totally agree with what you're talking about. Another episode that we've done not too long ago was with David Fields, who talked about how to create a fishing line. So really very much agree with your point here.
Yeah, thanks. Well, so I went back for the book. I looked at this whole question of the talent world we're in, right? And often we're in this kind of winner takes all world where in, say the consulting business, a lot of the big firms hoover a lot of the work up, right? And often as independent consultants, we feel we're on the outskirts, trying to sort of muscle into that, etc. Well, I went back to even reading like Charles Darwin, right? And he had that really famous term like survival of the fittest. And I think what that has made us think often is we need to do something 5% cheaper than a McKinsey or BCG or whatever, whatever it is. Actually, I think what he was talking about was this idea of diversity, that basically the more diverse our population is, the more likely they'll survive and they'll create these new traits that will be passed on. So really, I looked at everyone from, how top chefs are created to top entrepreneurs. And what was really striking in this modern talent war is that this idea of being really different and standing out. And so if you find that distinctive edge, so let me give you an example. I have an accountant, he's an independent professional. He does the management accounts fine. He does my, files my accounts and so on, but he's incredibly personable and really likes that personal connection. He's very good about making entrepreneurs feel comfortable and able to help them see how they can link this to their business goals. That's the strength. That's what he really sells. Everything else, other people can do as well, but he's got that really, that distinctive part to him that really, makes certain types of clients really want to work with him. So yeah, trying to find that bit really helps us stand out. That's very distinctive to our own unique purpose. And that's very important.
Well, Sharath, I want to point people to where they could find out more. You mentioned that you do have a website. Let's share that and any other links that you want to give for people who want to follow up and learn more about this work or reach out to you.
Thanks, Will. So please visit my work at intrinsiclabs.com. That's Intrinsic Labs. And please follow me on LinkedIn. I write and post regularly on motivation, related topics around work, around parenting, relationships, entrepreneurship, you name it, as well. And my book, it's all on the website, but Intrinsic is coming out soon. And it goes really deep into these areas, as you allude to, Will, as well, in terms of these areas. It has some very practical suggestions, but also I hope is a really engaging book that tells some amazing stories and very inspiring stories of how all of us can make that difference in our lives, and tries to see our lives as very holistic and very interconnected. And we're not just people at work, we're not just consultants, we're also fathers and husbands and citizens, right? How do we think about our motivation in that broad sense? So I hope that the book Intrinsic will also be a real inspiration of ideas of things we can do here.
Fantastic. So we'll include those links in the show notes. Sharath, love this discussion and this idea about really figuring out what drives us. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Will. My pleasure.